So with that, let's get started. I would like to first introduce again Andrew Roberts with cStor for a few opening slides, and then we'll get going with today's main event. Andrew, kick it off for us.
Good morning, everyone. As Kim said, I am Andrew Roberts, and I'm the Chief Cybersecurity Strategist here at cStor. Prior to joining cStor, I was on the customer side in charge of cybersecurity at a large university where I was responsible for keeping those systems and students safe. My responsibility now is to ensure that cStor continues to provide the right cybersecurity solutions that solve the challenges of our customers in a way that fits their business needs and strategies. Organizations from nearly all major industry verticals and levels of government look to cStor for the right balance between maintaining existing infrastructure and adopting new technologies, all while delivering always-on IT services to their own customers. cStor solutions combine the right mix of data center, digital transformation, and, my favorite, cybersecurity products to make your IT environment keep up with the constantly changing business environment. At cStor, we exist to put people on a path to success. And for us, that means our clients, our employees, and our partners. cStor's belief in this mission is what led me to join the company. We were founded by engineers, and we have not forgotten our roots. Our priority is building the right solutions for our clients, and we know that we are much more valuable when we deeply understand your business, your culture, your infrastructure, your capabilities, and your needs. We believe in strong partnerships and long-term relationships, and we always work far beyond a single transaction. cStor offers a broad range of services, from infrastructure and cybersecurity strategy to assessments to optimizations to staff augmentation. We help our clients create a more cost-effective and secure IT architecture that scales and adapts to evolving business needs. Now let's get to the business at hand and the reason that you're here, Office 365. Please allow me to introduce J. Peter Bruzzese, Microsoft Evangelist, Microsoft MVP, and Mimecast Evangelist. JP, the floor is yours.
Greetings. Oh, it's great to be with you folks today. I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself. This way we can move forward. So I am a Microsoft MVP, more specifically an Office Apps and Services MVP. So for those folks that aren't aware as to what an MVP award is, this is something that Microsoft gives annually to individuals who are leaders in various technical community buckets. And so my bucket originally was Exchange Server. I worked in the Exchange world for 15 years or so, and I still do. And then I was moved over to the Office 365 MVP bucket. And so now they kind of have us all under Office Apps and Services, which is kind of fun because we get to work with the SharePoint folks, the Yammer folks, the Skype for Business folks, Teams and such. But we still are unique to our specific field of expertise. So in my case, it's Exchange and Exchange Online. And we're going to talk quite a bit about cyber resilience from that perspective as far as email. We'll talk about Office 365 in general, but email is the mission critical piece to the discussion. You can see the rest of my bio here. I won't bore you with it. Co-founder of cliptraining.com and conversationalgeek.com, writer, speaker, author, and so forth. And as was mentioned, Mimecast Evangelist. So when we look at the story of Office 365, it's doing fantastic. Office 365, as of this point, is at about 160 million corporate users. This is well ahead of Microsoft's original projections. The growth is off the charts. It's their fastest growing business at this point. Microsoft is adding 50,000 organizations a month. They're growing year over year at about 40%, which is just phenomenal. So that's both good and bad because on the one hand, they're growing at a very fast pace globally, but at the same time, there are issues that come into play with that kind of growth. While working on the stability of the solution, the scalability of the solution, the focus on new features like Teams and such, and we can see that on almost a weekly basis, there are new features that are released for Office 365, whether it's Teams or Planner or one of these other tools. Microsoft is developing at a cadence that we've never seen before. But at the same time, we're also seeing situations where there are pieces that are still left for improvement. There's a need for enhancement of the solution on a variety of different fronts. So that's what we'd like to look at here. The focus point on cyber resilience, focusing not just on before an attack, but during and after an attack or outage. See, cyber resilience, a lot of organizations will focus on how do we protect you from some type of threat or attack. And the truth of the matter is that that's of course wonderful. If that's possible to protect me before an attack occurs, great. But we also have to be aware that there are things that can get through. There are outages that are out of our control, especially in an Office 365 world. So what do you do during an attack or outage? You can't just worry about before. Cyber resilience as a strategy has to take into consideration during and after an outage in order for it to really be a satisfying cyber resilience story. So we look at a few things, or I do at least. I look at a few things in the Microsoft ecosystem and say, is this enough? Is it good enough to meet my needs? So threat protection, security, DLP, these types of things. Adaptability, threat intel, end user training, recoverability, archive, compliance, disaster recovery, durability, the availability or continuity of the solution. These are the areas where I look at the ecosystem and I say, okay, where are things at and how can we improve things? And the reason for that is because, let's be honest, we live in a scary world. The fact of the matter is that this is what we see on a daily basis almost, or weekly at least. We see that there are attacks that are getting through Office 365 as well as, they're coming from other areas, but how do they get into an organization? Well, what's interesting is, according to the Wall Street Journal, about 97% of all cyber attacks start with a phish. So 97%, that sounds pretty high. Typically, when you look across all of the different metrics and statistics that come in, it's typically 90+%. So if 97% is a little high in your mind, just think of it from the perspective of 90 plus. Some say 92%, some say 95. Ultimately, the important part of the point is that it's a pretty high percentage. The threats that are coming your way are coming from email. So when we look at ways to defend our internal organization, if the majority of the threats are coming from email, then we need to do better in terms of making sure that our email is protected, right? It just makes sense. Some of the threats that we're seeing these days include things like ransomware, malware, URL links to harmful or malicious sites, impersonation attacks. Those are those wire transfer attacks. Links to harmful documents that are in Dropbox or other file sharing sites. These are the things that are coming our way. Now, when we look at those types of attacks, what's interesting is they're evolving. So yes, ransomware, very dangerous, certainly a malicious type attack that can take out an entire system. But one of the things I'll mention a little later is that there are more advanced and evolved forms of ransomware that can actually take out an Office 365 mailbox, not your system, but the mailbox itself, and encrypt the mailbox. As far as URL links to harmful or malicious sites, it's one thing to worry about that from a phishing perspective, where 1 million emails go out with the same URL. But see, again, the bad guys, they're evolving. They don't need to use the same URL for the attack that they're performing. They can use a unique URL for every single attack. Now, why does that hurt us? Well, it hurts us because a lot of the legacy mentality behind blocking these types of attacks is for part of the herd to get hit with an attack and then to update your block list and protect the remainder of the herd. That's sort of the Microsoft approach. They have 160 million corporate users, so if some get hit with an attack and then they report the attack in the hundreds or thousands, whatever the threshold is, it gets added to a block list and then the block list gets updated. And there's nothing wrong with that approach, a block list or blacklist approach. But in the modern world we're living in, we're getting hit with these URLs that are coming one at a time. So there is no block list or blacklist approach to that. You need to have something a little more dynamic to reach out and scan the page and see what's going on. It's the only way to protect end users. So when we look at email attack strategy, we have to look at ways of modernizing our defenses. And this is, again, this speaks to the before in terms of cyber resilience. What do you do before an attack? Well, you make sure you have a good strategy in place with regard to security. So when we look at Exchange Online, there are some concerns when it comes to security. For one thing, it's a single code-based vendor. In other words, Microsoft is the vendor that is providing the security to protect Microsoft. Now, typically, we don't necessarily trust that approach. And it's not a slight against Microsoft. It's just that over the past 20 to 25 years that we've worked in this world, we've probably noticed that there are third-party solutions that spring up around Microsoft, spring up around Windows, email, and so forth, with the goal of strengthening the security of your solutions. And that's simply to make sure that the solutions that you have, while they do what they do best, Microsoft does what it does best. They provide amazing operating systems and email solutions and so forth. But security is an animal in and of itself. And so typically we like to bolt on to ensure better security as opposed to going with the single code-based vendor approach. Office 365 is also a multi-tenant environment, right? It's a hosted Exchange environment. So you're on the same server as a variety of others, depending on the size of your organization. And that, makes for a very target-rich, large attack surface type scenario. So ultimately, why attack a company individually that has an on-premises Exchange solution when I can attack multiple organizations by focusing on low-hanging fruit, looking at how we can attack Office 365 and attack Exchange Online by sending emails that will get through or can trick the end users in those environments. So again, if you're a bad guy and you're trying to think about what's your best return on investment, the investment return is better when you have a larger attack surface and a target-rich environment. That's what Office 365 provides. So what's the solution? It's not to just sit here and complain about it. No, of course not. We need to look at defense in depth. We need to look at security through obscurity. Let's focus on these two for a second. So defense in depth very easily is illustrated by this picture here. When you look at these two homes, the one on the left has no protection. They're running wide open. If you put a nice pretty picket fence on the front of this, it would pretty much be the same thing. It's an open invitation for ones to come in. As opposed to the one on the right, they're a little bit overkill, but I think between the two, you'd sort of rather have the overkill. They have security cameras and a security system and a lion in a doghouse and, big fences and gates and such. The point is that you need to provide a defense in depth approach to the cyber resilience strategy for Office 365 by including things that currently Microsoft simply doesn't provide. So Microsoft provides a free Exchange Online protection solution, which is basic anti-spam and anti-malware. And they provide a paid for solution. You can buy it a la carte, or you can up your plan to an E5 plan, which can be quite costly. And that provides advanced threat protection, which is the pinnacle of what Microsoft offers in terms of Office 365 email protection. That includes a variety of different solutions like safe links and safe attachments and impersonation protection and such. But ultimately, when you compare what Microsoft has to offer with third-party solutions, you may find that the third-party solution can do more. Now, again, that's not a slight against Microsoft, and here's why. If we look back to Exchange on premises and we think about the way that we've run Exchange for 20 plus years, you never walk into an environment and the person says, there's my Exchange server or my Exchange servers, and that's it. That has never been the case in any real enterprise grade environment. Typically you walk in and they say, there's my Exchange servers, and then they say, and here's my security solution, whether it's an appliance or a software-based solution or cloud-based solution. Here's my backup recovery solution. Again, whether it's some type of software-based solution or cloud solution. Here's my archive. And again, why do you do this? Well, because these are things that are not built into Exchange Server. Exchange Server is one of the best solutions Microsoft has ever created, in my opinion at least. And yet, these are pieces that have been either provided to a minimal degree or have been left out completely. It's true with backup recovery, you can use Windows Server Backup to backup Exchange, but other than in a lab environment, I've never seen this used in a production environment. Archive, there's no built-in archive to Exchange Server. So you'd always have to go with the third-party solution. Security, there's some anti-spam agents that are built into Exchange, and starting with Exchange 2013, there's an antivirus solution that provides a minimal amount of protection, but again, in an enterprise-grade environment, you would always bolt on solutions. So how does that change with Office 365 to provide a cyber resilient strategy? Well, with Office 365, the only thing that really changes is that now you're in the cloud. So you wouldn't want these things to be appliances on premises or software solutions that you have on-prem. You need a cloud solution. And unfortunately, as a result, you have to change your mindset to have an all-in-one cloud-based solution. In other words, with the previous implementation, you could choose different vendors for all of those different pieces. But now with the cloud, you need to make sure that you have an all-in-one solution that does all of these things and does them well. It can't just be that they do a good job with security, but a horrible job with archive. That's not beneficial to you. So that really narrows down the playing field in terms of how many organizations out there, how many third-party solutions can provide you an all-in-one that really matches up with best of breed or best in class solutions for each of these buckets. Not only that, but you say, well, why can't I use different solutions? If you bolt on too many solutions to Office 365, you end up adding to the latency of Office 365 email delivery, and you'll have multiple points of failure. So you don't want that. Microsoft doesn't recommend it, and anyone who's worked in this field doesn't recommend it either. So you're looking for an all-in-one in order to still fill these buckets to provide a better cyber resilient solution. And again, a lot of this we're talking about is more than just the before, that's more security. But when you're talking about archive, you're talking about backup recovery, all of these pieces speak to the during and after an attack. Now, just going back to different attack ideas and concepts, the bad guys, they're looking for low-hanging fruit. And as we mentioned, having a solution like Office 365, it gives them a large attack surface, and it gives them a target-rich environment. So for them to sort of practice their craft and find the weaknesses, they simply have to work with Office 365 and do some testing and practicing, sending emails through to see if it works. And but ultimately, once they find that a situation will work, an email type will work, they don't necessarily want to be thwarted. So unless the attack is some form of revenge attack where it's a former employee, or let's say if it's an attack where it's corporate sabotage or espionage, and it's a specific target that's being focused upon, the bad guys are looking for low-hanging fruit. They can do something as simple as using MX Toolbox, as you can see here, and they can do a test to see, does the portal that the Office 365 portal have any additional security on the front end or not? So on the left, you can see that this organization, no, they just have protection.outlook.com. So they're using some form of EOP and ATP. And to try to recreate those settings doesn't take much on the part of a bad guy or a threat actor, or whatever modern term we want to use there. But ultimately, if you look at the right, having a third-party solution, in this case Mimecast, bolted onto the front end, it really removes that low-hanging fruit moment, because they look and they go, okay, what does this tell me? If I'm looking at trying to attack an organization or a group of organizations, and I'm looking for those that might be running with a little less security, I do a simple MX Toolbox lookup, and I find that the one on the left, they have nothing else. So that makes me curious. What are they not doing in addition to this? Do they not have endpoint protection on their Windows systems? Do they do training of their end users? Maybe not. Right? This makes me curious as to why it is they don't have anything bolted onto the front end. Whereas the company on the right, I look here and I say, okay, so they're willing to push their budget into an area where they have additional security. And it's somewhat comparable when you look at the numbers between ATP and what you would pay for, let's say, an E5 plan, as opposed to purchasing a third-party solution and bolting it on. And you say, okay, but they're pretty savvy here. They've got another solution in play. What else does that tell me? Maybe they do have endpoint protection. You would imagine they do. What about the end user training? I would imagine they're doing that. So again, this now becomes a little bit more challenging, and maybe I don't want a challenge. As an attacker, if this is my goal every day, I don't want to wake up in the morning and say, boy, I'd really like a challenge today. No, typically I'm looking for low-hanging fruit. So the one on the left is the better approach. It's also easier to recreate the vault. And what I mean by that is it's sort of an illustration from the movie Ocean's 11. And maybe you folks have seen that. In Ocean's 11, at the beginning, George Clooney and Brad Pitt, they're stealing the plans for the vault. Now, I always thought that they were doing that so that they could rob the vault. You know, their whole point is that they're in Vegas and they're going to rob the, I think it's the Bellagio, the MGM Grand, and maybe the Mirage. And so they're going to rob the vault. Well, but the first thing they do is they recreate that vault in a warehouse offsite. And that's so that they can practice and really get the job down perfectly. Well, why do we think that the bad guys in an email scenario don't do the same thing? Well, of course they do. To recreate the Office 365 vault is not all that hard. To set up an Office 365 portal, a legitimate portal, and send email through it to see what gets through, it takes all of 30 minutes and costs less than $100. So vault recreation is another thing. That's again why defense in depth is so essential to the story of a cyber resilient plan for the before an attack type of plan. Okay, enough about security. Let's talk a little bit about compliance and some of the concerns there. From a cyber resilient perspective, it's important to have some form of backup of your data, to have some form of retention of that data, a way to recover to a point in time. All of those things become part of a concern when you're dealing with cyber resilient strategies. So what do we have when it comes to the archive solution from Office 365? Well, for one thing, it's not really an archive solution. Now, I know some of you are thinking, wait a minute. I see very clearly it says archive. Yes, that's true. We need to talk about architecture for a second. So with Exchange on premises, there was never an archive solution. With Exchange Online, there still isn't an archive solution. And what do I mean by that? Well, for starters, there is a solution called in-place archive, right? That's very clear. They even have that on premises, in-place archive. That is not an archive solution. It's a PST repository. Now, granted, PST files are horrible. In fact, I gave a session about getting rid of the PST nightmare in your environment. I spoke at the Microsoft Exchange conference in 2012, I think that was. And I spoke for Microsoft about how important it is to get rid of PSTs. And that's because you can't discover information when you're using PSTs across your environment. So what does in-place archive do? Well, it allows you a secondary repository, and this is on premises, first of all. It allows you a secondary repository in order to perhaps use cheaper disk. So you might have your more expensive disk for your main inbox, and then you use cheaper JBOD array storage for your in-place archive, right? And then you can take all those PSTs and you can put them on the cheap disk and it works great. The same thing is true in Office 365. You can do in-place archive and ultimately it gives you a secondary repository for data. And you can use that for messaging records management to clean up that inbox, get rid of stuff, move it over. And that's not a bad thing. So it's a good feature. I just think it's poorly named because when you use the word archive, there's an impression already in our minds as to what that technology is. An archive is read-only data. Cannot be deleted. But Exchange and Exchange Online, by default, allow the end user to delete data, whether it's out of their inbox or out of their in-place archive, hence the poor naming. So if you think the archive means they cannot delete data, that's not true. It only becomes true if you put the mailboxes, and let's focus specifically on Exchange Online, if you put those mailboxes on some form of hold. We can call it legal hold or in-place hold, litigation hold, whatever the case. It's an evolved form of hold that Microsoft has developed, and it allows you some movement in terms of how long the data is on hold and so forth. But ultimately, when you say you're using the Microsoft Archive solution, what you're really doing is you're probably creating some kind of retention policy in the Security and Compliance Center that will now put that mailbox on a hold. Why is that bad? Well, it's bad for a couple of different reasons. Number one, a hold of that data in a retention policy structure, architecturally speaking, doesn't actually allow that data to be separate from the mailbox. So when an end user deletes data thinking that it's really gone, it goes in a recoverable items folder that's hidden from the end user. So there's no interactivity for that end user. They can't search their own so-called archive, but the mailbox bloats, and it'll bloat and bloat and bloat because the email is not being removed from the mailbox. It's just going in the recoverable items folder. So that's bad. At the same time, Because there's no backup of this data, there's no separate archive of this data. If anything happens to that mailbox, there's no way to restore that data, right? Now, Microsoft does have native data protection, which means there's passive copies of the data in the moment, but there's no point in time way to restore that data. So my recommendation when it comes to archive and cyber resilience for Office 365 is to have a separate data bank archive, and the cloud would be preferable. The value of that is, number one, you can run a lean mailbox instead of having it bloat. And we all know that there are performance issues with Outlook when it comes to having a mailbox that bloats. All right, excuse me, we've all seen how Outlook will have its hiccups and crash or freeze and so forth when the mailbox starts to get beyond a certain point. There are performance issues with regard to e-discovery of data in Office 365 when it comes to Exchange data. And these are the little things that Microsoft has to work on and improve in order for this to be a better story for them. But currently, that archive data causes mailbox bloat, there's performance issues, there's no interactivity for the end user. There's a better way to do this. And it basically involves using a third-party solution to keep the data separate. But there's another reason why you'd want to do that. So recently, I had a chance to see an attack that was developed by Kevin Mitnick. It's called Ransomware Cloud. And basically the way it works, you can kind of see here, is it allows the sender, the bad guys, to send you an email that says, hey, we're having some enhancement to Office 365 for your email. And if you would like to enhance your security, please click here. You click the button, and now you've pretty much just given them permission to do what they want with your inbox. Now, this is not a ransomware attack that affects your entire system. It just affects your Office 365 email account. So what happens is once you've done that, the bad guys can just encrypt your entire mailbox. Now, what's the remediation for that? Well, if you have no backup, guess what? The only way you can get your data back is with a paying of the ransom. That's it, game over. And then you have to go through, there's a document that Microsoft provides that you need to go through and remove the tendrils that have now been extended into your account, because once they have those tendrils in there, they can encrypt your mailbox again. So you have to pay them, and then you need to go through the remediation, and there you go. And of course, train your end users never to click those links again. Is there another solution? Yes. If you have a third-party solution like an archive backup recovery solution that allows you to restore the mailbox, well, then you can restore the mailbox to another location. You pretty much don't have to pay the ransom, and you're good to go. So again, this is before, during, and after an attack. We're talking about cyber resilience. So in the event something were to get through to your end user and they click a link because it's a new attack that no one has seen before, like one of these ransom cloud attacks, ultimately, the only way to recover and get to a point of what you had before is either to pay the ransom and do the remediation or restore from backup. So again, Office 365 doesn't have a backup, and that's a problem. So these are some of the things that we need to concern ourselves with cyber resilience. The third and last one I'd like to point out before we go to questions that might have come in is with regard to outages. So outages happen. They happen to everybody. There's no point in criticizing Microsoft or anybody else. They happen. Google has them happen. Apple has them happen. Everybody does. Amazon, and we just have to expect that that's going to be the case. When we think about outages, there are a couple of things that have happened recently, and these were things that are somewhat, unexpected. For example, on September 4th, there was a lightning strike in Texas. It took out the cooling systems for the data center there. Well, as a result, the servers that were handling identity management, the Azure AD servers, they were shutting down. So folks could not access Office 365 because Azure AD handles the identity management. So that's a problem. We had another similar type problem in January over in the EU. It took out the EU, it took out the Middle East, Africa, Asia, and this was a similar Azure AD problem. We recently had an issue at the beginning of May that was an Azure DNS issue. And so again, these are things that are going to happen, and we just have to be aware that Microsoft will resolve the situation when they can. The problem is that when we look at these things, we oftentimes feel like there's nothing we can do. And that's typically the case. If you don't have a third-party solution to help you continue working, then you will just have to sit there and wait, right? Now, looking at the numbers on this, Azure AD DNS issues from February to, let's say, May 1st, Office 365 suffered 18 separate outages, totaling nearly 400 minutes in duration. So there was one outage every 4.6 days or so. So how do you resolve these kinds of problems? Like, what do you do? Again, most folks will just sit there and wait, but there are actually third-party solutions like Mimecast, we'll talk about in a moment, that can step in, can allow your folks to continue to email even though Office 365 might be down. Now, what's the value in that? Well, one of the pieces of value to that is not just that your people will be able to keep working, but because a solution like Mimecast is an all-in-one and provides the ability to have security and compliance through a third-party archive, you will be just as secure as you were before the outage. You'll be just as compliant as you were before the outage, right? See, that's a smart cyber resilience strategy. The strategy has to not only provide the ability for folks to keep working, but you don't want them to step out from under your protective umbrella of security and compliance. Oftentimes, you know what folks do? When there's an outage, like the ones we were just mentioning, people will find a way to keep working. They'll switch over to their home accounts, their Gmail accounts and such. So they'll work. It's not like they just go home when there's an outage. No, they figure it out. But in doing so, they step out from under the protective umbrella that you provide with security and compliance. However, if you allow them through Mimecast to continue working, then they stay under your umbrella. So that's all part of a cyber resilience strategy. Now, to kind of bring this home, when we look at cyber resilience, again, we're talking about before, during, and after an attack. When we look at threat protection, we need to have a multi-layered inspection system that's effective against both widely used commodity attacks as well as customized and highly targeted attacks. Those times where folks are saying, I'm going after you specifically, a targeted attack, not something where it affects the herd and then we'll set up immunity for the rest of the herd after a couple of hundred or 1,000 people get affected and report it. No. You can't have that. That may work great for super large environments where you're not afraid to have a few people get hit, but for the most part, we can't have that in a modern world. The reputational damage that can come from something like that, the damage to let's say your customers, if their data were to get out in a DLP breach, or if it were to get out that your organization wasn't protecting them properly, it could just be horrible. Adaptability. We need to leverage third-party threat intelligence, optimize and deploy leading technologies, conducting ongoing threat analysis, automating remediation services, and delivering inline user education. And that last one is really important. Even though we may feel like the end user will always click the link, the most we can do is to remediate that and to get them to click the link less often, to make them paranoid about clicking the links or opening the attachment that they don't know who the sender is and such, the better. So we need to have some form of end user education. Durability. You need a solution that provides an email system that remains 100% available. And recoverability. A solution that simplifies and automates the process of recovering email in the event of some, let's say, new attack like a ransom cloud attack or some of these other types of attacks. So when you look at your cyber resilience strategy, do you have all of those things in place? See, a lot of folks, they say, well, I have a security solution. It says it can protect me. That's great. You need to have protection, but that's not cyber resilience at the right level for, during, and after attacks. That's part of the whole circle there. So personally, my recommendation to folks when I talk about this subject is that they consider a third-party solution like Mimecast. Mimecast provides enhanced security features to protect email from both inbound and outbound data loss. A solution that provides end user training and threat intelligence. Mimecast has a variety of different solutions that from their own intel as well as through third-party companies that they work with. They recently acquired Atata for additional features and like fake phishing and end user training. It's fantastic. Recoverability. The ability to recover in the event of a major ransomware or ransom cloud attack, you need to have an archive solution. You need to have that data separate for not only e-discovery and compliance, but also in the event of a problem that has to now require recovery and a restoration of the mailbox. And last but not least, durability. You need to have the availability of email at least. Even if the rest of Office 365 is down, no one's going to cry if Yammer's not working for a day or two. But when it comes to email, you need to have your email up and running. So Mimecast also provides a solution in that regard. So just to point out two small things here, the Mimecast targeted threat protection solution goes above and beyond what Office 365 can provide with Exchange Online Protection and Advanced Threat Protection. The way it does that is by having multiple funnels for attachment, email, and URL inspection, and then different levels of those funnels in order to provide a true defense in depth approach to email security. And as far as continuity is concerned, the Mimecast continuity solution, the way it works is there's a heartbeat between our customers and Office 365. It's an email heartbeat. In the event of a problem, instead of having to check Twitter or Reddit or some other down detector to find out if Office 365 is down, you're told, you're given an SMS alert or an email to a secondary email address that says Office 365 is down. What do you want to do? And there's a panic button so that if you hit the button, ultimately with one click activation, you can switch tracks and your end users can continue to send and receive email as if nothing else has happened. During the time that the outage occurs, you can keep working, and then ultimately when it's done, you can switch tracks back. Mimecast will update Office 365 with all of the emails that have been sent and received during the day without any duplicates. But again, that's not the best part of this scenario. The continuity solution that Mimecast provides doesn't just keep your people working. Because you're using Mimecast for security and archive, it keeps your people safe and it keeps them compliant. So all of that has to be taken into consideration for a strategy that is cyber resilient. Not only that, but then Mimecast has a sync and recover solution so that in the event you do need to restore a mailbox to a point in time, Mimecast can do that for you. So at this point, I'm going to take things and turn things back over to Kim and see if we have any questions that have come in or comments.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, J. Peter. Just excellent information, very timely and relevant given today's threat environment and certainly the ubiquity of Office 365. So thanks everyone for joining us today. At this time, we will open it up for questions. As a reminder, you can post them to the questions pane in the GoToWebinar control panel. And we do have a few coming in for you, J. Peter. So let's see, first question, why would I buy a premium solution if I already paid for EOP and ATP with my Office 365 licensing? Can you speak to that?
It's a great question. I mean, nobody wants to pay twice for the same things, right? So just to be clear, EOP, Exchange Online Protection, that's free. Microsoft provides that for every customer, and it's basic anti-spam and anti-malware. ATP is a little different. You have to pay for it either a la carte or it comes with, let's say if you purchase an E5 license, which is their most expensive license tier. But the question is really, are these the same things? Is EOP, ATP, and Mimecast the same thing? Are you paying for the same things? So I like to liken it to a fence. If you were going to purchase a fence, and let's say the builder that you're working with says, well, I'll give you a free fence. I'll give you a 2-foot picket fence that goes around your property. And there you go, you're set. And you might say, all right, well, that's great. That'll keep the critters out maybe, right? But that's not really going to provide the protection I need. I live in a dangerous neighborhood called the internet, right? And so you say, all right, so EOP may not be enough for you. So the builder comes back and says, you know, for a little more money, you pay us extra, you upgrade the deal, and we'll give you a 4-foot fence that'll go around your property, and it'll definitely keep bad guys out. And you look and you say, okay, I appreciate that, because you realize you're dealing with someone that's not a fence builder. That's not what they do. So they have their options, but it's not necessarily as robust and feature rich as what you'd like. So you go back to them and say, here's what I really want. I want a 10-foot fence with barbed wire, with security cameras and turrets in case I want to have armed guards. Can you give me that? And the answer is no. So that's when you go to a third party like Mimecast. So the question is, are we paying for the same thing? Well, it's a fence. Yes, it's all three are fences, EOP, ATP, and what Mimecast security offers. But as you can see, there are very different types of fences. And in the case of Mimecast, what you're really paying for is that added level of security at a level that is much further beyond where Microsoft is at the current moment. So no doubt they'll continue to enhance their solutions over time, but currently If you're really looking for solid protection, you have to go third party.
Great, thank you. Next question. Is it really true that Office 365 doesn't offer an email backup? So I believe you touched on that a little bit. Maybe you could dive in a bit more for our guest today.
Okay, so I say this at live events, and I get similar questions. People say, well, no, I think they really do have it. And I say, no, there's no backup of your email data. And someone will say, well, look, if I lose something, I'm going to call Microsoft. And I said, yes, and you're going to be told that they don't have a backup of your data. They just can't fathom this. Look, it's very simple. It's too much data. I'm not allowed to share the exact amount, and it changes every second, so there's no point in even. But just imagine exabytes upon exabytes of data. And so it's impossible for Microsoft to do a backup of that. I mean, think about what the backup window would be. You know, how do they handle that? And how would they restore it? I mean, it's way too large. So this is definitely something for a third-party solution to provide. And there are a variety of different options in that regard. But again, I think you want to narrow down the number of solutions that you're having to purchase and deal with. So if you can have a solution that can cover all of the other pieces to the puzzle, the archive, the security, and still provide a sync and recover solution, that's the best approach. Now, Microsoft does have what we call native data protection. It was on one of my slides, but I didn't really cover it in great detail. But basically what that does is it provides passive copies of your data. So there are 4 copies. There's an active and multiple passives of your data strewn across 2 different data centers. So yes, in the event of a problem, there is a failover that can occur to other passive copies of your data, but that only provides up to the moment copy of your data. So there's no way to do a point in time restore. In the event of a problem where, let's say, the data is encrypted, like with a ransom cloud attack, without a backup, you're stuck. So you have to pay the ransom. And again, Microsoft simply does not do a backup. There is no way to do a point in time restore of your data, plain and simple. So I know that's a bit hard hitting, but it just is what it is. It's where things are at with Office 365.
Excellent, thank you. I think better to just be authentic and real about it, right? So we've got one more question coming in. And isn't Microsoft big enough to do everything a third party does? Maybe this is back to your house analogy. If they're the builder of the house, shouldn't we get the solution from the builder of the house? J. Peter, can you speak to that a little bit more as well?
You know, that's a great question. It really is. And what it really shows is that, that you're thinking about Microsoft in a positive light. And I really appreciate that, because for a while there, Microsoft went through a bit of a slump. And every article that was ever written was all negative. And I would write positive articles because I'm a Microsoft loyalist. I as an MVP, and even before being an MVP, I 100% support what Microsoft is doing. So I like to hear that there's a lot of confidence in what Microsoft can do. But there's a couple of reasoning points on this. Number one, if it were true that Microsoft could develop everything to the highest degree and nobody else could come into play, then Microsoft wouldn't acquire third-party solutions. And if you look, you could do a Wikipedia search on Microsoft acquisitions over the last 20 years or so, and you can see that right up to the current day, Microsoft continues to acquire third-party solutions. They see something in those solutions that they don't have, something that they appreciate that their developers haven't developed. And could they just go and develop it themselves? They could, perhaps, but it would take time and money. And Microsoft doesn't have an endless supply of time and money, as much as everyone thinks that they do. In fact, somebody recently said there's no room where there's a bunch of Microsoft people, developers sitting around with nothing to do. Everybody's working, right? Everybody's doing their best and working, and it's not an endless supply of developers. So that being said, while I also feel a great deal of confidence in what Microsoft is working on, they continue to leave areas for gaps that are areas for enhancement, and a solution like Mimecast fills those gaps currently, and so that's just the way it is. It's the other point on that I'd like to mention is that Microsoft, they are also focused on so many other things right now that there are always going to be these pieces that they leave open, and that's where we need to look to third parties to bolster the solution.
Excellent, thank you. Another question. This is a good one, I believe, as they all are. Would this replace my Barracuda protection, or would I need to, or would you recommend I keep it if I had Mimecast?
So that's a good question. I'm a believer of defense in depth and having multiple solutions, but not necessarily having multiple solutions that do similar or the same type of thing. So I believe this would replace, if you have like, let's say a Barracuda appliance or something on-prem, it would replace it. The other thing is that it alters, it's better for your mail flow. Your mail would flow through Mimecast and then into Office 365. It would all stay in the cloud, and it would be the better approach to cyber resilience in that regard. If you're looking for other areas for defense in depth, a way to apply that, let's say if you have additional budget, then I look to encourage things like endpoint protection, protection in terms of end user training, things of that sort. So the defense in depth requires that you look at other layers, whether it's privileged account management, user behavior analytics, things of that sort, to bolster other areas of your defenses that might be weaker.
Awesome, thank you so much. That actually concludes our Q&A for today and our event. So I would like to just thank again our guest speakers, Andrew Roberts with cStor and J. Peter Bruzzese with Mimecast, for his expertise and everyone's expertise. You can reach them on their email or, of course, through the website. And again, that concludes our event. So thank you, everyone, for taking time out of your busy schedule today to join us. We hope to see you on a future cStor event very soon. Have a fantastic day.